There is a new state-of-the-art model coming out of China, and this one is incredible. So let's talk about it. So, Kimi released Kimi K2 Thinking, and I think this is absolutely crazy because this is a different kind of model, and most people thought this was just a standard LLM release, but it's not. It's not your standard LM release. This is a completely different ballgame because you can see the part that I've highlighted here. This is a thinking agent. So what this means is that this is not your typical LLM that you just simply talk to. This was built from the ground up as a thinking agent, meaning that step by step while using tools, it achieves state-of-the-art performance on some of the hardest benchmarks that exist out there. This is a crazy industry shakeup because we now know that many frontier labs are going to be scrambling to maybe even delay their AI releases as Kimi K2 Thinking jumps the gun here. Now remember, this is no longer an LLM, this is a model. And I'm going to show you guys this bit here. Kimi K2 Thinking can execute 200 to 300 sequential tool calls without human interference, reasoning coherently across hundreds of steps to solve complex problems. And that is their latest test time scaling. So they scaled the model differently by scaling both thinking tokens and tool calling steps. Okay, so they didn't just, scale the thinking, which is what previous models they've done. They've scaled the tool calling steps. So essentially what we have here, guys, is an agent that thinks long-term. So a thinking agent that uses tools, and they manage to scale this. And guys, this is state-of-the-art, not small jumps. This is a crazy, crazy jump. Okay, so take a look at this. So this is the Tower bench, okay? Now this benchmark is used for evaluating conversational AI agents in scenarios where the agent and the user both have agency, where they both can act. And this builds on the earlier benchmark called the TOE benchmark, which, had a single control, and this is a dual control environment. Now, what do you guys notice when you see this? Okay, you can see that the #1 model right now is Kimi K2 Thinking with 93%. Guys, this beats GPT-5 Codex High, okay? That is insane when you think about the level of this kind of model. Guys, remember this model is open source, and it's basically free for anyone to use. So this is a huge, huge deal. Okay, so with this benchmark, if you want to know how it works, each task involves a conversation and tool use, and the agent uses tools, API calls, database queries, and the user, which is simulated, can also use tools, which is, toggling airplane mode, and then there's a world state, which is then tracked, and the benchmark basically checks whether the agent succeeds in guiding the user and using tools to achieve the goal. So this distinguishes agent reasoning versus agent guiding, and it finds that, this one is much harder, this benchmark, and we can see that Kimi K2 Thinking just leapfrogs these other models, guys. So this is crazy because we all knew that Kimi K2 was a good model previously when it was released. We knew that it was pretty much ahead of where DeepSeek is, and those guys, I don't know what they're up to, but hopefully they can manage to, come back with another model. But Kimi K2 is really stealing the show because they've leapfrogged GPT-5 High, leapfrogged Claude 4.5 Sonnet, and of course Grok 4. So this is a state-of-the-art system, which is pretty crazy. Like I didn't expect this jump to be that high. And even if there was a jump that high, I would have at least expected the jump to be at least nestled in amongst the other LLMs like it was previously, not to leapfrog it by 6%. And you might think 6% is not a lot, but guys, these frontier labs, they're chasing maybe 5 to 10% at best, considering these models are getting harder and harder to squeeze percentage gains. Now, before we dive into the other section of AI news, if you're working with AI tools, but you're constantly switching tabs, juggling models, or hitting paywalls, there's actually a better way. It's called a chat LM, and it's easily the most powerful all-in-one AI platform I've ever used. You get access to every top-tier AI model. I'm talking GPT 4.1, Claude 4, Gemini 2.5, Grok 4, all under one roof. No more bouncing between platforms. But it doesn't just stop there. With the Deep Agent, you can do everything. Build apps with a single prompt, generate full documents or pitch decks, even launch agents that browse the web and connect to services with Deep Agent MCP. If you need visuals, you can get access to cutting-edge image and video generation tools. If you need code, ChatEM includes Code LM, a pro-level coding environment powered by multiple models. And if you want to stay organized, you've got projects built-in task file management systems that integrate directly into your workflow. And the craziest part about all of this is that every single feature is just $10 a month. That's Deep Agent, CodeLM, AppLM, Grow Access, everything for less than a single lunch. If you sign up using my link, you can get started with ChatLM today. Seriously, stop making it harder than it has to be. Now this is the benchmark. This is the takeaway that if you haven't seen this already, this is what you need to take away from the video. One of the hardest benchmarks is called Humanity's Last Exam. Now, if you don't know what Humanity's Last Exam is, it's kind of like what it sounds. It's a literal benchmark test for AI, and a provocative metaphor for the existential challenges facing humanity as AI approaches expert human abilities. So the Humanity's Last Exam, it's a multimodal benchmark developed by the Center for AI Safety Control and Scale AI. And this benchmark, guys, which you can see it's number one in the world, consists of approximately 2,500 to 3,000 extremely difficult questions, spanning over 100 academic subjects designed to explicitly test both the depth, and the breadth, of an AI system's reasoning knowledge. And the difficulty is so high, that most college students would struggle to answer the questions which often require domain expertise. And this benchmark was created because previous benchmarks like the MMLU were no longer challenging for cutting-edge language models, which has begun to surpass human experts on those tests. So remember guys, this was a benchmark that was intentionally created in order to be the last of its kind, curated to expose current frontier models where they fall short in terms of human expertise. And what we can see here is that Kimi K2 manages to leapfrog other frontier models. Pretty crazy. 44.9 on that, and I'm truly surprised. Now hopefully other companies are going to be able to independently verify these claims, because maybe this incredible result is just not sheer luck, but maybe there is an exaggeration, but take a look at this as well. So for those of you who want to get into the super details of how the model works behind the scenes, you can, of course, skip this bit if you want, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's crazy. Because how did Kimi K2 manage to do this in terms of the big picture? So DeepSeek has 671 billion parameters, whereas, Kimi K2 has 1 trillion parameters. However, they both use something called mixture of experts, meaning that instead of using, everything for every task, you only call in a specific experts for whichever task you need. DeepSeek had around 128 expert teams available, and it would use 37 billion parameters per token, whereas, Kim K2 has around 64 expert teams. And it has fewer teams than DeepSeek, but each expert team is bigger and smarter, and it activates 8 experts and 1 shared per word. So it's got 32 billion parameters per token, which essentially means, the long story short, is that Kim K2 is a much more efficient model. 1 trillion premises total, but only 32 trillion parameters working at once. Kimi K2 is the efficiency champion. Might be a bigger model, but it uses fewer active parameters per word. So that's why this is so surprising. So when we take a look at, all of this stuff here, we just really need to take away that, because of course you don't want to get too much into the details, but it's super interesting to see how they've managed to change in terms of providing a leapfrog in terms of the quality. Now remember guys, this is a model that is designed as an agentic kind of model. So what we have here is Agentic tool use. And once again, when we look at all of these, of course, Humanity's Last Exam included, we've got Agentic Search. Leapfrog's Anthropic Leapfrog's chat and is up to date on the co-leaderboard with real-world data set and information collection. It just leapfrogs. And the craziest thing about this Agentic Search and Claude I've tested, I was making a video earlier today, and I asked the top 3 LLMs. I asked GPT, I asked Claude, and I asked Kimi K2 for specific pieces of information on the internet about something that had just happened. The model that managed to get all of the information correct was Kimi K2. It provided in-depth detail, guys. This was crazy. I asked it about something about Jensen Huang. In fact, I'm going to pull up the tab right now to show you guys. And so, this is the example. I said, give me everything every time Jensen Huang talked about the air race between United States and China. And it gave me a detailed timeline every single time that was talked about. I asked Claude, I asked Chachi, and there weren't as many details. And this isn't the only thing I've asked it. This probably isn't the best kind of example to show you guys, but I tested it on a bunch of different internal benchmarks that I'm using for something privately small that I'm using, and it was really surprising at the reasoning efforts. The reasoning efforts and the agentic search honestly shocked me, because oftentimes when you use these frontier models and you look at the benchmarks, You say, you know what, on this benchmark all looks good. But then when you put it to the test, it just simply fails at everything. So for me personally, that was where it's like, okay, this is clearly something innovative, something they've done. Something innovative here, because you don't make those kind of jumps. You don't leapfrog the competition, at least not frontier labs, without being, some kind of innovation, so pretty crazy. Now, some people are wondering, coding well for coding. Luckily, they're not encroaching on Anthropic's market share. It seems that Kimi K2 is actually still a pretty decent coder. But the only problem is that Anthropic seems to dominate coding in a way that others just can't. And I think that was a pretty smart move from Anthropic because, competition is continually getting more intense as time goes on. And so, when we take a look at the coding benchmark here, we can literally see just how impressive this is. We can see that the SW benchmark, it surpasses ChatGPT, but on the other two benchmarks, it does do pretty well. So I got to be honest, of course this is going to be a benchmark where you have to test this out yourself. Most people, when it comes to coding, they are just going to pick the best model. There isn't going to be any loyalty, or they're going to pick the cheapest model, which is why some people manage to use grow code fast, I think. So yeah, there's clearly some kind of interesting things going on here. I haven't tested all of the coding capabilities, but from what I've seen on Twitter and what I've seen online, it seems to be pretty okay. And the reason I say that, look, people are just going to use whatever the model is the best, is because dealing with bugs and dealing with coding challenges is just something that's simply not worth it. Even if it's, dramatically cheaper, oftentimes people are just willing to pay for whatever the best model is. Now, if we move on to long horizon tasks, this is another surprising area. What we can see here is that Kimi K2 manages to really go far when it comes to these long horizon tasks. So if you want to really see how a model does at, the really extreme lengths in terms of how the model performs, you can do long horizon tasks, where the model will have to perform sequentially multiple tasks together. Now you have to understand that this is exponentially harder, because every time you take an additional step, there is the potential for that step to be wrong. Now this area just surprises me so much, and the example that I love to use, and when I first, found this example, it made me realize how good these models are in certain cases. So let's say you were baking a cake and there were 120 different steps. Each time you make a step, if you make a wrong step at step 30, by the time you get to step 120, if you have the wrong output, it's going to be, exponentially harder to get that correct output because you have to take 120 steps correctly in order to get the right thing. But you can see here, look at this one, okay? By reasoning while actively using a diverse set of tools, K2 Thinking is capable of planning, reasoning, executing and adapting across hundreds of steps to tackle some of the most challenging academic and analytical problems. This is the example that they use. In one instance, it successfully solved a PhD mathematics problem through 23 interleaved reasoning and tool calls, exemplifying its capacity for deep structured reasoning and long horizon problem solving. So this is why I said it's pretty crazy, because the way how they've trained the model is they've trained it to inherently be a reasoner, inherently to be agentic. And this is where I think the models are moving, and I didn't really realize this on many models. But if you want a model to perform really well, you're going to have to, of course, train it in the way that you want it to be trained. So remember the early days when we had models that were just LLMs, but they weren't really trained in order to, do tasks sequentially. But when you clearly have a model that is trained to do it, thinking sequentially, of course, and doing the tool uses, this is the kind of results that we do get. So you can see reasoning completed, and it just goes on and on and on and on. So that's why this kind of agent is so good at performing those long-range tasks. So Kimi K2, that's just amazing. Now, a little bit of a coding, I guess you could say, demonstration was Manim. Now, if you don't know what Manim is, I don't think people appreciate what Manim is, but Manim is a mathematical animation engine, and I'm going to show you guys what this thing does. And this is why it's a good demonstration of coding. But essentially, it's, I guess you could say, a Python library that lets you create precise, smooth, educational animations, the ones you see in 3 blue, 1 brown videos, and you don't drag and drop stuff. You actually have to write the code that tells the computer what to do, how to move, how to draw. And if an AI is able to do this successfully, it essentially is able to get many high concepts correct at once. So it needs to understand math or conceptual understanding. It also needs to have the design sense to make it look clean and smooth. And it also needs to have code logic, which is to be able to structure those animations correctly. Not only that, it needs to be able to have timing and storytelling, which is making the visuals actually explain something. So when an AI can, number one, understand the concept where you say explain neural networks visually, then write the man in Python code that animates it step by step, then do it in a way that's clear, watchable, and educational. This is a strong sign that the AI isn't just spitting out code like other models. This means it's thinking visually and narratively. And this matters because it means that you're going from AI that writes text to AI that writes code, then to AI that can create motions, visuals, and timing, which is like the AI giving a sense of spatial reasoning and cinematic direction, like a junior filmmaker who happens to code. So when you can realize what these models are capable of, given the correct tools, that's when you start to realize, wait a minute, these things are a little bit more capable than I did think. Now, there was also making music in Strudel. I'm going to show you guys exactly what that's like. But Strudel, once again, isn't a pastry, unfortunately, even though you might be hungry right now. This is a programming language for music. Specifically, Strudel is a live coding environment, and I think I don't think it's on right now, but this is the demo that they used. But essentially, this is where you can write code that generates music in real time. And instead of playing the instrument just like Manim, you just write the code, and every line of code instantly changes the music. So this is cool because this isn't just, pick a genre and hit play. You need to understand rhythm. You need to be able to, has loops timing effectively. You need to be able to write the code that sounds good when it's executed. And this is different. Okay, this is different kind of intelligence. And these are the benchmarks that I personally do like. I probably will include a short Strudel demonstration of what it actually sounds like. You can be the judge on whether or not it sounds good. I mean, everyone's got different music tastes. So, let's take a look at some of the creative capabilities. So, creative capabilities for K2 Thinking actually delivers improvements in completeness and richness. Apparently, it shows stronger command of style and instruction, handling diverse tones and formats with natural fluency. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I actually agree in this use case. The reason I agree so much is because I've personally tested this model several times, and every time this model has given me a response, it's actually improved via the thinking capabilities. If you don't believe me, I want you to try this for yourself. Try GPT-5 Thinking versus GPT-5 Standard for any qualitative task that you might have. This is tasks such as writing an email, doing, a general search, or just doing something really basic that doesn't require multiple levels of abstraction. When you're done, compare the thinking to the non-thinking, and you'll realize that GPT-5 tends to completely overthink all the steps because it was trained in that way. But for Kimi K2 Thinking, because it was trained agentically, it seems to use that in a much different aspect, at least in my personal experience. Let me show you guys a clear example of this in play. So they said this prompt right here, which is the cultural review, and the prompt was to find a quirky under-reported local event in Singapore from October of 2025, and write a 300-word cultural observation about it and the style of New Yorkers' talk of the town. So you have to understand that, like a lot of the times when you ask LLMs tasks like these, they tend to just, blindly focus on one or two things. But when you have a thinking agent, it's able to grasp every layer of that request in a way that previous models couldn't. And one of the layers that it's able to do that is via search. So we can see here that it's able to search for something, and we can see that it just grasps basically the first most promising candidate. But with thinking and reasoning, we can see that it's able to agentically search through pages, scroll, navigate through the pages, find something, and then it's able to say, okay, let me actually search for something much more specific. Let me find something that's under-reported. I should look for this. Then it goes again and decides to search again with an updated goal. Then it reasons again and says, I need to truly find something under-reported, quirky, local. The search results are showing mostly major events. And this is the kind of process that a human would undergo when completing the same exact task. But of course, since it's an AI, it's going to do it quicker. And you can see there's multiple different reasoning steps. Multiple different reasoning steps, to which the AI is able to then give us the final output, which is much more rich, and it's just got a lot more depth if you compare them. I'm not going to bore you with reading them out, but it just goes to show that this thinking agent is a different paradigm. Now, you could also look at the personal and emotional one here. It says, at 32, unmarried, childless, lived in New York, and currently unemployed. What matters more in life? Staying true to your own feelings or meeting the expectations of society? The first, question that it gives you, it says, staying true to your own feelings wins every time, yada, yada, yada. And then it gives you a few things that you can do to improve your life, which is actually pretty good. And then you can see here that this one actually goes ahead and it researches, it looks through research papers, not just, your traditional articles. And then it gives you a full in-depth, framework that it generates. So this is super, super intriguing. Now remember, this is going to be qualitative. So please understand that you might not actually like this model. Some people find that, Gemini is better for them. Some people find that Claude is better for them. It all depends on what kind of person you are. The qualitative benchmarks are truly the most subjective ones because there's no right or wrong answer, and you can realistically go for any kind of, way. So please understand that, of course, maybe this is going to be a model that you don't like. But if that is the case, I wouldn't say completely dismiss the model because its agentic capabilities are not to be missed. Now, one of the most surprising things to me at least was the cost to train Kimi K2. Most people may actually not even give this model a second glance, just because it's not got DeepSeek written all over it. However, as we discussed in the previous section of the video, this is a model that is even more efficient than DeepSeek and completely, just stomps it out on almost every single benchmark. Now, when it comes to cost, this is important because if you train a model and it costs you nearly $1 billion to do that training run, and you achieve only marginal improvements in performance while spending millions, nearly billions of dollars, that doesn't seem cost effective to me. And you have to understand that, of course, right now, it's great. AI companies everywhere are getting funding. They're just spending billions of dollars on the data center buildup. But eventually, you are going to have to figure out how to do this AI thing in an efficient way. And you are going to have to figure out how to ensure that your company makes a return. And one of the things that you need to be able to do is to be able to offer those goods and services at a decent price. And you have to also understand, I don't know why I keep saying that, but if you have to understand, is that for OpenAI, one of their biggest costs is training frontier models. I did some Googling and I hope this AI overview is correct, but it says that the GPT-5 training run suggested that it could have cost $500 million, with some estimates reaching up to $1 billion. And for GPT-4, they spent an estimated $80 to $100 million to train that model. Kimi K2 is 10 times cheaper than GPT-4. Now remember, this is according to a source familiar with the matter. This could be completely false. It would make sense for them to lie about this. To people think their tech is far more impressive. I mean, we're never going to get the true figures, but just based on those estimates, that doesn't seem too good in terms of these Western frontier labs because they're spending millions and millions of dollars every time they want a new model. So that's pretty crazy if you ask me. Now, there's also something that most people didn't realize as well. There is also the heavy mode of K2. So this is quite like the Grok 4 Heavy, and it's pretty simple. So the K2 Heavy just employs an efficient parallel strategy. It rolls out 8 trajectories simultaneously, then reflectively aggregates all outputs to generate the final result. Essentially what they're saying is they basically have 8 versions of the model, like a jury or, judge group, and then they essentially just ask them all the same question. Once they have those 8 things, they summarize them all into one consensus score. Or not score, but one actual output. And then of course that output, given the final value, whatever that output is of course resulted as the result. And the reason I've added this is because when we actually take a look at K2 Heavy, what we can see here is rather impressive K2 Heavy on several areas, leapfrogs the frontier models even more. We can see that on the humanities last exam, it gains around another 6 percentage points, which is rather impressive. So I don't know how frontier models are going to approach the coming season, because this is November, and if you're a frontier lab and you're about to ship your MVP, which is, your new large language model, and you're about to say, okay, we did well on this benchmark or that benchmark, and Kimi K2 comes out with a new model that is leapfrogging your competitors, and for 10 times cheaper than the previous generation of models, maybe you have to rethink your launch strategy on how you're going to present this model to the world. You have to understand that at this point in time, there are millions, if not billions of dollars on the line, because one wrong announcement from your frontier lab, and that company's valuation is going to, plummet or skyrocket. So it's super interesting to see just how crazy this is. I mean, K2 Heavy seems to just be dominant across many different benchmarks. And once again, I'm completely surprised by this. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please smash that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss a future update. We've got a lot more exciting tech stories coming your way. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.